excuse me, a significant decrease in cervical disease in Scotland can be attributed to HPV vaccination. Hi, and welcome to Microbial Minutes, ASM's update on what's hot in the microbial sciences. Wherefore art thou, HPV edition? I'm Julie Wolfe, and our first study is going to be from the British Medical Journal. The take-home message from this study is that HPV vaccination has decreased cervical disease and virus prevalence in Scotland. So, human papillomavirus, or HPV, is associated with cervical and other anogenital cancers, as well as some oropharyngeal cancers. But there is now a vaccine that can prevent HPV infection. Vaccination began in 2006 with the development of two separate vaccines. One, called Gardasil, is a quadrivalent vaccine, meaning that it protects against 4 different HPV strains, 6, 11, 16, and 18. And the other, Cervarix, is a bivalent, or protects against 2 HPV strains, HPV 16 and 18, the strains that are most associated with cancer. Now, efficacy of the vaccine in protecting against cancer will take a long time to measure because the time from the first infection to development of cancer can be decades, 20, 30, even 40 or more years. And so in this study, what they're going to look at is not the prevention of cancer, but the prevention of various types of cervical disease in women. We are going to look at the cytology and histology scores of women, for example, looking at the cervical intraepithelial dysplasia that is measured in histology. This is given various grades, as shown on the right-hand side here, and depending on what that grade is, it is more or less associated with likelihood to develop into cervical cancer later on. This study took place in Scotland, where in 2008, the country introduced a national immunization program for mostly girls aged 12 to 13, but also for those who were part of a catch-up group, as we'll discuss on the next slide. And there was an 85% uptake. So this is a large proportion of the population that is being protected by this vaccine. Scotland also has a national cervical screening program with a 70% uptake. And in this cervical screening program, women starting at age 20 will have their first cervical examination to look for the presence of any abnormalities. And this being a retrospective study is going to look at a variety of different medical histories of women who have had or have not had HPV vaccination available to them. On the next slide, we'll see that there were a number of different women who were screened, nearly 140,000. 64,000 of those were unvaccinated at the time of that first cervical inspection at age 20. But around over 74,000 of them were vaccinated with various doses. So the recommended dosing is 3 doses for the HPV vaccine, but some had only received 2 or perhaps even 1 dose at the time of their first cervical inspection. The cohorts of women who were investigated could be grouped into their birth year. So those who were born between 95 and 96 were available for that national vaccination program at ages 12 and 13. Those who were born between 1991 and 1994, they weren't able to get the vaccine quite as early, but they were part of what's called the catch-up cohort, and were still the vaccine was still made available to them. And they may have had only a few doses by the time that they had their first examination. And then those who were born in 1989 or 1990, at the time of their first examination at age 20, they had not had that HPV vaccination available. If we look at the most severe outcome, both by cytology on the top-hand graph and histology on the bottom graph, we'll see that the researchers compared those women who at age 20 had received 3 doses of the HPV vaccine to those who hadn't received any. On the top, we're looking at cytology abnormalities, women who were given severe high-grade squamous intraepithelial lesion, or readings, who had this in their cytology readings. And the percentage is shown on the Y graph there, so a very low percentage of the overall cohort. But we can see that there is a sharp decrease over time in the women who had 3 doses that were available to them. However, in the group that also has no immunization, there is a higher reading in the earlier years, say 91, 92, and 93. But there's also a sharp drop off, such that by 95 and 96, women who had no immunization had the same very low percentage of this cytology abnormalities, and the same is seen down below in the histology abnormalities. And this speaks not only to the importance of the vaccine in preventing these cervical diseases as conferred by HPV infection in women who received the vaccine, but also the protection of the women who didn't receive the vaccine by the process of herd immunity. On our next slide, we will see that this is written up in a number of different places. The British Medical Journal provided both an editorial from its editorial staff, in which they also speak to the importance of this herd immunity that protects not only the women who had received that HPV vaccine, but also those that hadn't received it. But because so many people are protected, that virus is unable to be transmitted between most of the population, and thus even those without the vaccine have been protected. Other studies, not shown in this particular study, have shown that this correlates with a decrease in prevalence of the virus in general in the population, in a highly vaccinated population. This study was also the subject of an opinion piece in the British Medical Journal, where the first author, Tim Palmer, wrote an editorial about the optimism from these findings and how this is able to eliminate not only this infectious disease, but the negative sequelae of infection, such as cervical dysplasia and hopefully cervical cancer. And he writes that this is a veritable triumph for medicine. This was written up additionally in many mainstream newspapers, such as BBC News, who quoted not medical personnel, but a public health minister who says that this study really demonstrates the significance and continued benefits of this vaccination program. Now, if you'd like to hear a little bit more about the development of the HPV vaccine, you can listen to a conversation with Doug Lowy on ASM's Meet the Microbiologist, in which he discusses the research which led to development of this vaccine. In summary, we've learned that HPV vaccination is linked to a dramatic drop in cervical disease, and hopefully this will correlate with a drop in cervical cancer, but we won't know that for many decades. I'd like to thank you for listening to Microbial Minutes and thank Ray Ortega for production. I'm Julie Wolfe, and I'll be with you next time.